100 people gathered to protest what they call corporate greed and social inequality. One person was arrested when he tried to throw a shoe over the White House fence. The Secret Service says the shoe hit a uniformed officer, and the man has been charged with assault. There you see him sitting on the sidewalk there. Today's demonstration follows a tense confrontation Saturday outside the Air and Space Museum on the National Mall. A couple hundred people were picketing in front of the museum, but when they tried to force their way inside, guards responded with pepper spray.
We were peaceful. We did not want to shut down the museum. We did not want to inconvenience tourists. We wanted to engage in a dialogue using our free speech rights. We never got past the first door. We didn't get past the metal detectors. Security came rushing out, bum rushed us like a line of football players, corralled us, pepper sprayed the first dozen of us, and forcibly removed most of us. 3 people were detained.
So the Occupy movement first took root in Lower Manhattan 3 weeks ago. CNN's Susan Candiotti spoke with people who came from near and far to see it for themselves.
Eating a bowl of cereal after sleeping under the stars, this retiree and her teenage grandson took a bus from Detroit to camp out with Occupy Wall Street. Show me what this is like. You have this tarp.
This is home.
For a week, choosing to sleep on the ground under a blue tarp, mainly with young people in a public park. Why was it important for you to come here and bring your grandson?
Well, I felt the need to show support to the movement. The politicians apparently don't understand what people need.
How we doing?
Heshi Gorewitz isn't sleeping over with protesters.
You camping out here? Thank you, guys. You're doing a great service. Your generation, my generation, everybody. Keep it up, man.
The community college business professor, who also founded an upstate farm co-op, is just spending the day. He likes the mix of young and old, employed and unemployed, trying to build a consensus.
It's happier, it's bigger, it's more sophisticated, it's more real, it's more powerful than I ever could have imagined it. It's the 99%ers, it really is. Let's not focus on what divides us. Let's focus on what unites us. That's the way that we can bring about change.
I see this movement as a movement of movements.
Fordham University sociologist Heather Gautney says movements like Occupy Wall Street don't really need a leader.
I think it's really about grassroots democracy. I think it's about people trying to create ways of expressing themselves politically because they feel that the electoral channels are closed to them.
Change for a teacher, change for a retired grandmother worried about her grandson's future, all looking for signs that someone's listening.
CNN's Susan Candiotti joins us now live. So Susan, do the people there, I'm wondering, do they realize how these protests have spread across the country, or because they're out there, are they sort of in a vacuum?
I think that many of them do, because remember, a lot of the people here are really adept at using social media, and to a large degree, that's how their message is getting around. And also, Don, they have set up an interesting community around here. For example, I don't know if you can see past me here, they even have a sign set up here with a daily weather report that tells people what it's going to be like and what the rules of the camp are. For example, we observe quiet hours, this kind of thing. So they're really trying to be as organized as they possibly can, yet really going day by day, deciding one day at a time what will happen the next day at one of these people assemblies. And it's quite a diverse group here, as we tried to indicate in that story that you just saw.
All right, and looks like, you know, again, the crowd, you're downtown, but you were at the other one that was at Washington Square Park yesterday, so they got more numbers there. I'm sure for you, you've been covering this for a long time. Does it feel like Groundhog's Day, or do you see, personally yourself, that it is growing, not only there, but also at Washington Square Park?
Well, definitely it's busier today, this Sunday, than it was last Sunday. Of course, we have it's about 15 degrees warmer than it was last Sunday. That's part of it, of course, and it is a Sunday and people are off work, and so it's easier to get down here and take a look around. At the same time, clearly we have seen protests growing around in different cities around the country. So yes, the numbers do appear to be growing, but not to the degree they were last Wednesday. I mean, that was the largest march that we saw when the unions joined in. So we'll wait and see whether this has staying power, especially when it starts to get colder.
That certainly is a question. Susan Candiotti, thank you very much. For many people who grew up in the 60s, Occupy Wall Street reminds them of the anti-war and the civil rights movements. And I asked civil rights icon, Dr. Joseph Lowery, for his impression about it.
It very definitely reminds me that this is a spontaneous people movement that has not come up out of any long-range planning on anybody's part. This is spontaneous, and it's I think it's a spiritual explosion that's happening in this country, and it may very well turn to a serious movement to help America straighten up and fly right.
Dr. All right, the Occupy Wall Street protest has drawn a big fat bullseye on America's financial system, saying it unfairly favors the wealthy. You're looking at live pictures now of that movement in Manhattan. David Weidner writes for the Market Watch column. He writes the Market Watch column for the Wall Street Journal, and he joins us now. So, David, how is this protest affecting the stock exchange first?
Well, I think very early on, you know, we're in our fourth week now, and I think early on there was sort of it was largely being ignored. There have been a lot of protests against the financial system in New York since the financial crisis. But one thing about the dedication of these kids staying down there and keeping at it, confronting police, I think Wall Street is really taking notice of this now, and they're wondering, you know, is this a movement that is going to shape politics, shape public policy, and maybe make it tougher for them to do their business? So what was, you know, before it's kind of a traffic problem for people downtown has now become, you know, is this going to affect the way we make our living?
So you really think they are paying attention for the most part?
I think that's definitely the case. I mean, the size of the crowd is growing. Obviously, there's much more media attention now. I mean, it was 3 weeks ago you couldn't find this on national networks and in big newspapers, even local papers here. And now every day there's story after story. I was just flipping through the channels. There were multiple reports on the size of the crowds, the quiet protests downtown. So this is definitely getting the attention of financial professionals.
And the reason I ask you, and we did, the first weekend it happened, we did cover it on this program. It didn't have as much attention because it wasn't as big. Now that it's growing, it's garnering more media attention. The reason I ask you that is because Wall Street is just not going to change and say, okay, we're going to give you what you want out of the goodness of our hearts. There's going to have to be some intervention, and it's probably going to come from the government. That's why I ask you, are they really paying attention? Because in essence, they really don't have to. Change doesn't come, it's not going to come from inside.
Well, I think what's making the people on Wall Street a little bit nervous is that they saw how the Tea Party started from this same sort of anonymous, low-key, dismissed movement and became a real force in American politics, pushing the GOP further to the right and much more fiscally conservative. And I think that's the fear here. They're worried that this movement, which is, you know, has a lot of different interests, but it's primarily coming from the left, is going to push the left side of the American political spectrum and have some influence in 2012 and maybe a pushback against some of these Tea Party politics that we saw come out of it. And, you know, Donna, I really think that this is there's a big distinction between the two. I think they're growing very much the same way in terms of how the movements are getting traction and getting exposure and becoming more powerful. I think there's a strong correlation between the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street.
I smile. I smile because that was my next question, and you just went to, because there's disagreement, because if you ask members of the Tea Party and some Tea Party supporters, this is no different. Even Eric Cantor said it was he was concerned about the mobs that were taking over Wall Street. But it's both a grassroots movement that came out of frustration, whether one is political, as the Tea Party says they're political, but this movement said it's not political. They're focusing on money, but ultimately it's going to have to be about politics, as I think you said.
I think that's exactly right. I mean, they're talking about financial influence in the democratic process, and you know, they feel that their generation, their part of society, this so-called 99%, doesn't have a voice, doesn't have buttons to push and ways to get their rights and their needs taken care of, Don. So it is very much a political movement, even though they say that they're not, and is that they want democracy returned to the people. They see corporate America, finance, big business, big banks as pushing all the buttons in Washington right now, and they feel like they're out of it. So I know that there's the rhetoric coming out of Occupy Wall Street, but there is a very strong political part of this.
David Weidner, Wall Street Journal. Thank you, sir. Appreciate it.